this recording later, it'll be posted to our YouTube channel, so don't worry about missing a thing. In the meantime, if you're watching and spectating, please make sure that you have your mics on mute, just so that we can give our speaker some time to speak uninterrupted. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat on the side panel, or wait until the presentation is over, and then we'll have a quick Q&A. So without further ado, as you know, this is the Collective Studio. We're a design thinking community. We run monthly workshops to help everyone with practicing working and collaborating with teams on design sprints. And outside of that, we also have webinars where we invite guest professionals to talk about their skills, their experiences, and as well as certain topics that probably aren't covered in boot camps. So if you're all here, you're all going to learn something that you probably didn't know before. So without further ado, I leave the floor to Rifan, who will introduce himself. All right?
Yeah, hi. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. First of all, just want to quickly thank the Collective Studio team for giving the opportunity for me to share some learnings today. So I'm excited to learn together with everyone here today, and hopefully we'll have some fun. Cool. Thanks again for coming into this session. Not sure where everyone is from, so maybe later on you can type in the chat where you're watching this from. But I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, so this is Monday morning for me. And let's get to it. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. So today I'm just going to be changed throughout the last few years in REA Group, where I work right now. A little bit about CK history. So CK is just abbreviation of the design system team name, and I'll talk a little bit about that a bit later on. I'll also talk about what's in the design system, how that bring in the return on investment, and at the end of the session, we'll have some Q&A. Since I'm sharing this, I can't really see what's happening in the chat, so maybe just shout if there's any question while I'm presenting, or we can always have that Q&A at the end of the session. Cool, so first thing first, again, my name is Rifan Thamrin. You can just call me Rifan or Riff. So I am currently a senior product designer at REA Group. So REA Group is a company based in Melbourne, Australia. We have companies or branches across Australia, nationwide, and we are the largest digital sort of marketing business in the property sector in Australia. So right now I've been working in this company for almost 4 years. So I started, I think, joining REA in 2019. So when I first joined REA, I started as a product designer, interaction designer in the mobile platform team. So I wasn't actually in the design system team. I only moved into the design system I think a bit later on. So my first job in REA was actually a designer in a mobile platform team. So the mobile platform team goal was to actually make sure that they are the gatekeeper for every designers or developers that are bringing in or contributing back their designs from other teams into the core app of the application. So without going too much details into that, in early or mid 2021, that's when I first moved into the design system team, so DS, design system. So the reason why I was brought into this design system team, I guess it was quite interesting because I was one of the only one who had a strong focus in mobile applications, whereas the focus of the entire business was actually more in the web platform. So after a few years of having a design system in a web platform, they finally started seeing that it's important for them to also do the same thing in the native platform, and started to build the native platform design system from the ground up. And for that reason, they were looking for a designer who wants to help contribute in that space, and I just happened to fit within that category, and I moved into the design system, hoping to help build the native platform design system. So fast forward now, January 2023, a native platform design system has finally been created. We've got a full team up and running now. We're just under a year right now. We're trying to catch up with our web platform team. I'll talk a little bit about the history of that design system later in the later slide. And obviously in the future, my goal is hopefully to grow this capacity of a native platform design system, not only for it to sort of help the business to get a better release time or save hours, but also hopefully my role can also expand a little bit more in helping other designer across the business to be a bit more familiar on how to design for a native platform. Cool. Moving on. So Construct Kit. So this is the name of our design system. So like every other companies, if you're familiar, they usually have a different branding or different name for their design system team. So we call our design system team Construct Kit. So I guess for people that are not familiar with design system, or this is your first time hearing about what a design system is, so a lot of people might have misunderstood design system to simply a UI kit or just a library of design. But the design system is actually more than that. Design system is a collection of all the different visual styling, different pattern styling, your type, font sizes, your spacing, your documentation. So pretty much everything that involves a pattern, a design that helps the business to cut and save hours in development, and also to introduce alignment between communications between product managers, designers, and also developers. So I'll talk a little bit about the history of our design system. So the design system in REA started in 2018. So at the time, I wasn't actually in REA just yet. And even when I joined in later on, I was still not in the design system team. So at the time, they're operating it by themselves. It was a bit of a smaller team. So if you've got your product manager, we had a designer, a couple of web developers. And because it was only the first year that started, so the business was still sort of playing the ground around trying to see whether or not this is the right investment to move forward. Well, fast forward now in 2023, we've grown to a much larger team. The last few years, we've proven that we actually bring benefits to the business, and therefore we've now got a more, full-size team that is focusing purely on design system. So we've got our product design manager that looks after the product, which is our Construct Kit, and we've got our tech lead in the web space, and also his job is to make sure that every technology that's used in the business, it's going to be aligned with the technology that we use to build our design system, so that they can easily adopt our patterns or components. We've got delivery lead who basically helps us plan our roadmap and make sure that we hit the targets, and making sure that everyone in the team is actually happy working what they're working on. And then obviously if you've got web developers, we've got 3 of them now, and we've got 4 Android and iOS developers, so 2 iOS and 2 Android. And with the design team, so we've got a staff product designer and myself, a senior product designer, sitting in here. Actually, this picture here, it changes a little bit from year to year. At one point, we actually had 4 designers sitting in the design team, and it was actually a really great help at the time, because with 4 designers, obviously we could move a little bit faster than what it is. But obviously because of the way business is being structured, or people movement around the business, we now only have just myself and another designer working in the design system team. Now, what I'm about to show you now, this is how our documentation site or our design system website looks like back in 2018. This is when we didn't have a lot of money and effort to put into this thing. So basically you don't have to worry if you, as a business, whether you're a small corporation or mid-size or large-size corporation, when you want to start a design system, you don't have to worry how it looks like, as long as someone gets to it. And you can start really from just a simple doc site like this, and then this is how it looks like a few years later. So there's more people joining in, there's more thorough information architecture being implemented in this. There is also design tokens implemented into this, and I'll talk a bit about design tokens a bit later on. And later I'll also be sharing the actual website so we can have a look at what the details of this documentation contains. And now I want to talk a little bit about how all of this design system that we're talking about helps the business, at least for REA. And hopefully this experience can also help other teams as well that want to set up design system in their company. So this is a realestate.com.au website about a year and a bit ago. So this basically is our main product of realestate.com.au. This is where most Australians look for their houses if they want to find a place to rent. And this is where they normally go for that property journey. And this is before the design system was completely set up. And with the help of design system, we could finally then rebrand the entire website. We can improve the experiences. And this is how it looks like today. So we've got a much cleaner design. We've got a clearer actions. We've got a clearer patterns and components to use. And all of this was possible because there's a design system team that is supporting them. So then you might ask now, how is that possible? What did the design system team do in order to achieve all of this? That's a good question. So to unlock those creative vision, so the design system team need to figure out two things. We split it into foundations and the system itself. So within the foundation, we look at typography, illustrations, and color. So in order for every designers in the business to be able to contribute back to the main product, we need to set up a design foundations. So we created a new typography token sets. We created a couple of illustrations for them to use. And also we created new color sets that is baked into a color tokens, which I will talk a little bit about later on tokens. So in the system part, obviously, all of this foundation has to live in a design system. It has to be properly documented in our documentation site in the design system. And then with the brand, we work with the marketing people to make sure that the brand is going to be stretched nicely across all applications that we need to release at one point of time. Cool. So that's pretty much sort of the history, how we started as a design system, how Constructed grows from 2018 all the way to today, and also how this work has helped our products from last year all the way to moving forward to be a bit more aligned across the entire business. And obviously what I'm sharing you is just one of our products, but REA actually comprises of so many brands, and the more brands that you have, the better the design system could help in aligning those decisions and also creating consistency across different platforms and different sub-brands. Cool. So now you might be asking, yes, all of that are pretty cool, but what's actually in the system, right? So when we talk about what's in the system, I think one thing that I want to share is whatever I'm sharing today might not be the only answer. It's just like when you're buying a pizza, right? There's going to be so many different flavors. There're going to be different toppings, different base. The way they make the dough is a little different, but at the end of the day are all pizzas. So same with the design system. What I'm showing you today is how we think we build the design system, and this is our recipe in REA Group. But again, this is not just the only way to create a design system. Cool. So what's in the system? So this is sort of a diagram that I would like to paint us today to see what comprises our design system. So here on the left-hand side, Figma, this is where our design library is all basically set. So Figma, we actually only moved into Figma about maybe 2 years ago, just before the COVID situation all started to happen. Before that, we were actually on Sketch, and we are super thankful that we actually migrated our design files into Figma, because when COVID hit, it actually really helped us in allowing us to all work remotely and contribute back to this design system library. Right now, we're really happy with how Figma is working. Not sure how it works in the future, obviously, with the recent news about it being bought up by Adobe. We're just hoping that they're going to support Figma the way it's been working, and even actually help improve Figma to be a better platform for designers. And there's a cool collaboration tools for designers and developers as well. This bit in the middle, this is where the main engines are. So this is obviously your React or your web platform. This is Swift UI, your iOS, Kotlin for your Android. So we want to make sure that everything that is written in the design is also being built in the code. And we want to make sure that there are strong alignments between the three platforms in the web, iOS, and also Android. And then lastly, this is our ConstructKit logo. So this is our doc site. This is where we document every single process of the design, how to use the particular components, how to use a particular patterns, where your decision trees are all basically created. So our recipe for a successful design system is to make sure that design, code, and documentations are always aligned as much as you can. So for the first 3 years, this has been our key principles. Every time we want to release a component or we want to release a pattern. But actually in the last maybe half a year, as we sort of grow a little bit into maturity in our design system team, we started to explore a little bit actually on trying staggered releases. Sometimes we might release a design without the code. Sometimes we might release the code without the design, just sort of to test where people are actually wanting to adopt and wanting to use. So all of that are sort of exploration, but at the end of the day, we still want to make sure that these three are aligned. Cool. So this is just a screenshot of how it looks like in our Figma library. So on the left-hand panel is where we put all of our components, things that are sort of marked with P. It's something that we're still working on and something that we want to do. Things with the rockets mean it's been shipped and it's been aligned with code and also design. I'll also jump into a Figma of this later on to sort of show you a little bit of how it looks like and how we sort of set it up. Now that we're still in this topic of looking at buttons, I just want to now kind of show you how can a simple components or having a design system helps create consistency and also create better communication also and saving hours of development and design. So now let's talk about buttons. So when we talk about button, you might think, oh, isn't it super easy to design a button and deliver a button? Well, that's what I thought as well when I first joined the company. But it is a super underrated component, and we think a simple button is something that can be easily designed and adopt. But the reality is, the bigger the company is, or the more sub-brands that you have, it's actually harder for you to make sure that every buttons that are used across your product is actually aligned. So when I first joined REA, I quickly noticed when I was designing for a few different screens that there are so many different variants of buttons, whether it's different in size, whether it's different in its corner radius, whether it's using like 50 different shades of red, different sizes in the font sizes of label. So a lot of these inconsistencies end up in creating a mess of buttons. And it's obviously not the best way to represent our brand because, the better your product is, the better your brand is presented in the product, the more trust that your customers and your users of the product can be. So now let's have a look at how design system actually can help you in making sure that the buttons are actually aligned. So this is when design token comes into play. As I mentioned earlier, before I've mentioned design tokens a couple of times, so this is, I guess, the right sort of appropriate time to explain what a design token is. So for those of you who are not familiar with design token, think of a design token as like a container or a template that can basically take in any sort of information. For example, in the past, if you're wanting to use a red color, you might be writing the hex code. For example, in this way, E402B. Sometimes when you are designing with just a hex code, when you pass this along to developers or other designers in a different team, there could be misspelling. They might not realize the numbers are not correct, and therefore you create inconsistency just within the colors. Now that's only talking about colors, but there could be your font sizes as well. It could be your spacing. It could be your corner radiuses. The way the design token works is that you create this pseudo name. So for example, in this, we call it a background brand static. So can make sure that this background brand static acts like a container, and inside that container, we can put in this hex value. So the next time we say background brand static, we always know that it's tied into this color. And how does this work? When we work with developers, the developer also makes sure that in their code base, that they also write the same thing. Rather than simply putting in E402B in the code, then they would create a shell as a container and call it the same name, background brand static, and then they will take in the same value as the design. So the next time a designer and developer or a product managers are talking about, oh, hey, let's make sure we use a background brand static, everyone would know what a background brand static is, and it should avoid miscommunication. Well, if you still make a mistake with the design token when design token is implemented, then we gotta make sure we have a one-on-one discussion with that. But anyway, this is just to show that design token can be applied to every single foundations level, whether it's a color, whether it's a spacing, whether it's a typography. And this really helps in making sure all of us in the business talk in the same language. Cool, next thing. With the design system, we can make sure that we can create consistent experiences across all platforms, especially like a business in REA where we have to manage web platform, iOS and Android. Design system finally helps us create that consistent experience between all these three platforms, and it's just been wonderful in also helping us save hours of developments. And I'll talk a little bit later on how do we actually save our developments and how do we actually measure this, and what's the implication of the business on the return on investment. And obviously, as I mentioned before, now that we set things up with a design token, it really helps us in improving communications between product managers, between the businesses, our designers, and our developers. And obviously, with a design system, one thing that we want to make sure is that every component that we build in the team is always going to be accessible, whether it's through the color contrast, whether it's through the optional text, whether it's through voiceover. We want to make sure everything that we build is accessible and also on brand. So these are sort of the four benefits that we want to think of when it comes to design system. Obviously, this works for our team, and I think this four is something that's quite generic that you can also bring into your team if you ever want to apply a design system thinking in your business. Cool. Now that I've talked about all of that, let's talk about return of investment. So when we come to return on investment, there are sort of four key pillars that we want to cover. So the first thing is engagement, second thing, efficiency, the adoption, and also speed. Design system, as I mentioned earlier, can help in all of that areas, and this is sort of the way we sort of measure it. So this is just an example from our company. So when we talk about engagement, is we want to make sure what's the percentage of the different repos in our business that have actually started to use our design system repo in order for them to actually later on basically benefits from the products that were released in our design system. So for example, in our business, we've got about 72% of the repo throughout all our live active product that are using our design system. Efficiency, so from 2018 until today, we've saved about 390,000 hours. And this is a big number that our business really love because they know, oh, we're saving so much hours. That means we're saving money, and we can still continue putting budget into the design system team and making sure the design system team keeps growing. Adoption. So this is more about how many of the components that we actually build in the design system in our product actually being used by different platforms and different repos. And this is just an example. For example, we just recently built a native platform design system for the last year or so, and so far 12 of these components have been used in 54 different repos. And speed, obviously, now that we have components that designers and developers don't have to think about designing and developing again, they can focus completely on what's more important, whether it's going through their discovery or actually delivering products to the market. So yeah, we've been able to cut that process down and help improve the speed. So how do we then measure all of that? So we have this product called construction worker within our design system, and this is how we measure things. So this is basically a site of our design system, and I'll quickly show you if I jump into this documentation here. So this is basically our doc site. We call it Constructed, as I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, this is not live yet, so you can't actually access this. This is still only available internally, but in the future, we are really hoping to make this available to the external audience. And I think we have plans to do it at least this year. So this is the way we calculate stuff. So we've got an analytics table. We've got an overview here. The overview basically covers all the three platforms: web, iOS, and Android. And cumulative hours saved. This is how you know how many hours have been saved in all the platforms. And this is a snapshot hours saved. So the difference between cumulative hours and snapshot hours saved. Cumulative, basically from the day a single repo used our components until today, whether or not that repo has been deleted, whether or not the product is no longer existing, that number is still saved in this cumulative hours. Whereas the snapshot hours, I guess this is a bit more accurate on what is currently live, what is currently in product. So the moment a component has been detached, or the moment a experience in a product has been detached, then that number is no longer counted in this snapshot hours. This is also to sort of see sort of what the latest version of usage has been created. So this is good to know how many percent of our repo in the product actually use our design system. This is also, again, a diagram to see those numbers of system that I use between the three platforms. We even get to see what sort of system are actually using our components. And here is to check on the stats of what components are being used the most in the three platforms. And obviously, if you want to kind of go into details, you can jump in sort of to the web. This is sort of the iOS. You get to see sort of what versions are people using. You get to see, like, in details the system. You get to see what components are used. For example, here a button, you want to check where this button is being used. You can also then quickly see. And this is a way for us to then do our reporting, because when we know where these components are being used, we can then tell the business, so, hey, so these are the outcome of our design system. No longer that we make things a lot faster, but obviously it helps the product teams to actually deliver this to the market a lot earlier. Cool. So while we're already in this documentation, I might as well show you this design system. So this whole documentation site, it's built in with a design token. So another thing that I forgot to mention about design token, a design token, since it basically is a container that saves an information, you can then create theming through that. So for example, you can create a light mode and a dark mode. So that's one of the benefits that we probably, why we use design token. So because this whole website, it's basically built using a design token, we can easily toggle between a light mode and a dark mode to sort of give you a look on how that might looks like. So maybe if we go to this section, for example, this button here, so if we toggle this on, then that's how it looks like in dark mode. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, so all of these documentations are all basically written between the designers and developers. So a designer will go through the design in Figma, and then if they want to look into sort of the guidelines or the examples used, and they can basically go through this site here, and this is where sort of all the different guidelines is basically written. So in order for designers and developers to know what to do when it comes to using those components. And we released the native file about a year ago, as I mentioned, and therefore now you can toggle between the three platforms now. So if you want to see how it looks like in Apple, Android, and also in the web platform. Cool. So now getting back to the slide, now that we know how we basically measure the return of investment, now let's talk about how we actually then get those data. What are those numbers that I mentioned before? So the key thing to this is quite simple. We basically ask ourselves, have we tracked the time? If yes, great. And then we can use that number. How do we actually track time? So every time a designer or a developer is working on a component, let's say this time it's a button. So say a designer worked for 3 days on the button and developers also work 3 days on the button. So that's a total of 6 days. So every time a team or a repo is using a button, then immediately we can say that 6 days of development and design have been saved. And that's how we've been tracking the time. But then obviously there's on the other side, if we haven't actually tracked the time, then the best way to go about it is to actually estimate the hours based on all the history that we can find. So obviously when we're estimating hours, it might not be as accurate, but it's actually not an issue, because the idea of showing the number of hours saved is not really to be super accurate in how many hours have actually been saved, but it's more of presenting the benefits of the efficiency that the team can actually get from having a design system team. Now, as I mentioned earlier, so the time spent versus the number of system is how you get your hours saved. And we've been using sort of this formula for the last few years, and we also started implementing this in the native, as you seen before. Now, if you are interested in sort of knowing a little bit more about in details how we end up saving these hours, and you want to look into like our past presentation on this as well, our team has written a nice blog on the details of it. So if you are keen, there is a blog post that talks about it. So this is basically some of the posts that are clearly, I guess, described in more details. And I might drop this in the comment section later on so that all of you can have a look at your own time. Cool. And that's pretty much everything that I would like to share today about the design system, how it benefits the business and any team. And yeah, cool. Hopefully that's not too much of information. And if you've got any questions, I think now it's the right time to do so. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Rifan. That was the most sophisticated design system I've ever seen. That was so clear, super simple. I love the way that you use the icons to signify the status of the components that are being built, because that's a problem that I've come across. Is just knowing which components are actually have been tested through usability testing we're going to use versus things that are like already done and ready to use. But yeah, I appreciate the talk, and I will go through the comments right now to see what kind of questions are being left, because I see a lot of good questions coming in. Yeah, so I have a question actually about Figma and React JavaScript. How did you find a way to integrate the two? Like, what kind of plugins did you use?
To integrate between React and Figma?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't actually use any plugin. Let me, I think I'm still sharing, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is how we've sort of set up our design system in Figma. So basically everything that is built here, we don't use any plugins, so that it automatically goes to our repo in our React. So we've got dedicated developers at the moment that is working on it. So everything that we done here, we usually pair with a developer, and the developer would basically build it from scratch for us. So yeah, there's no actual plugin in making sure the two works. The only thing that we make sure is aligned is through design token. So for example, this here, if we click on this button on inspect, you get to see here that it's using a background brand static, for example. And that's basically the only thing that the developers need to know. And everything else is just built on the specs that have been assigned, because developer, with the beauty of Figma, developer can just come into this and they can click on here and they can quickly inspect on what the corner radiuses are, for example, what are the sizes of the label and things like that. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think the most important thing is just to make sure developers and designers are always working on design system together rather than being at a separate sort of process.
that's right. Gotcha. Thank you. And username the Hamster Man asks, how did you figure out this Figma organization structure? Was it following best practices, or arrived at it together with your team, etc.?
Yeah, so basically there are heaps of different design system out there. So before we even started our design system, we look into all the big names. So we look at Spotify's, we look at how Airbnb does it, we look at Carbon Design System. So there's a bunch of company that we look up to, and we take inspirations from all of that, and then we worked out with our team what is the best way to set our things up. So the way we've done it so far is what suit our company the best, and the way that our designers are basically used to creating components. So one thing that we always do is that we created a Slack channel. It's called the Design System, Constructive Design System. And we basically we do polls, we do surveys, and ask our designers on how they would like to basically help contribute, or how would they like to use our design system. And based on all of those conversations that we had, we found that by separating each component into a separate page allows them to find the library a lot easier in their file, because they can just then click on the library. And for example, in here you can click on Shift and I, and they can go, for example, to this design system. And when you sort of split them into different page, in this library, it's also sort of split into different components. And so far, so good. So far, everyone's happy, and this flow kind of work well with our business.
Okay. Some weird clipping.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you. And I'm going to jump ahead because I realized there was a question that was asked about how did you measure for efficiency, but I believe you explained that in your talk already. So we have another question here from the Hamster Man again. They said, are design tokens stored in code, Figma? Are they abstract concepts or actual features of design software like Figma? I think we did cover that, but if you want to reiterate.
Yeah, so I can definitely explain that. So right now, Figma doesn't necessarily have a design token feature, but hopefully in the future they can actually create one. Right now, the only thing that you can set up in the Figma is basically a style. So you can set your color style, and you can also set your font style. So although it's technically a style, we still consider that as a token for the sake of making sure that we are aligned. Whereas everything else, like corner radiuses or whether it's spacing, that is something that we can't just create yet in Figma without the help of a plugin. But in the code side, yes, we do have a proper design token. So let me show you. So in this dockside here, if we go to, for example, foundations, and if we go to color, for example, you can see here that for a text, for example, when we call it text primary, this is our design token for text primary, and it carries value for dark mode and also light mode. And all of this is basically set in here. The same way with our corner radiuses, we set it to the token. Spacing, we also set it to a token, and also typography here. We also set all of this into a token. So yeah, as long as everything is aligned in the code, and then we just understood what the concept of token is in Figma, I think that's the best way to go about it. There's also actually a plugin called Thema in a plugin called Thema in Figma, and that's probably the best plugin that you can use if you've already sort of set your uh, layers and styles. So for example, these are all light mode. So if you have a plugin, you can actually then call that plugin and change this into a dark mode. I have to, let me share my, how do I change my sharing? Let me stop streaming. Sorry, I'll just quickly share my Figma so that we can all see how this works. Cool. So, for example, I want to make this into a dark mode. And with that plugin called Thema, I can call the plugin. Oops. So Thema. I don't know. Yep. And then, so if I want to change this to a dark mode, because I've set it up in the Thema plugins to remember the styling that we have set up in our library. And if I want to change this to dark mode, and a simple click of that will then change whatever in light mode into dark mode, just like that. So yeah, Thema is another plugin that I would recommend you to use. Cool, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. That was awesome. I'm gonna check that out, definitely. We have another question here from Vina Raja. I believe they have a question about the construction kit that you have. They said, based on the stats on savings and efficiencies for web, they seem to think that it's really high, like higher than iOS and Android, and they want to know if you have any insights as to why that's the case.
Yeah, that's because we've had the design system for web for 5 years, and we only just started iOS and Android mid last year. So obviously, because of that, we only had a limited number of components. We only had new initiatives in the mobile app who's starting to adopt iOS and Android components. But hopefully, obviously, in the next few years, that number will start to catch up with the web. It's just, yeah, because of the different timing. Therefore, we've got a very different number.
Okay, understood. Hope that answers their question. We have the username Bearful Minder, and they ask, how do you manage version control for design elements and features / pages?
So in Figma, we've got basically, sorry, let me see which screen it's on. Yeah, cool. So the cool thing about Figma now, we've got a control where it's almost set up like GitHub, where you can do things in branches. So everything that is already live or up to date, obviously, we kind of sort of align that with the icon here. So everything in here that's got the mobile means it's already been approved, and they're all basically working across the platform. We've also made sure that we set a status here. So in here, for example, Figma has been released. In web, iOS and Android, it's also been released. Everything that's still sort of waiting, we kind of marked it here as a park with this sort of icon. And obviously everything that's sort of new, it usually lives in the branches. And this is how we separate between working file and also things that's sort of still in flight or still work in progress. And that's the same way with the way we've done it in the doc side as well. So let me just stop the sharing. I'll show you a different screen. So if I share this again, so then I go back to, we've sort of set our website here. So this is what's internal to us and what we normally use, that it's live and it's available for everyone. But then as a design system team member, here I've also got a staging So in the staging axis, this is where we normally test things out. So we always split what in progress or in flight versus what's actually available in life. Hopefully that helps with how we keep things in order.
Alrighty, hope that answers your question, Bareful Minder. And if anyone else has questions, feel free to unmute your mic, or you could write your question in the chat. We'll give you a few seconds to think about it.
Actually, while we're talking about that sort of management as well, in our documentation site here, we also have a change log. So this change log basically also helps in order for people to kind of see the different updates, and if they want to sort of go back in time, they can also always check this change log as well. So that's how we also manage to keep things in check between different versions that we have released.
So is it your responsibility to maintain documentation, or is that split up between all the designers on the team?
Yeah, so we work together, we split our work, so we divide and conquer. So the change log it is a manual labor, it's a manual process. So every time we release a new version, there's actually a lot of sort of work that gets to it. I guess the thing with design system, things that we want to be mindful of, every time you create a breaking change, so a breaking change means any changes that affects all the design in a drastic way. When that happens, you gotta make sure that every repos are aware of it, and you gotta make sure that the change log it's written properly. And we also need to make sure we set up a documentations around how to actually migrate from the old system to the new system. So just like in this example of changelog, we've got documentation on how to upgrade to version 2. This is when we had a major release. Same thing with V3 and V4, which is our latest one. And yes, it is something that both designers and developers usually work together.
Okay, I think we have another question coming in. I'm going to ask this question because I'm kind of curious. When it comes to inconsistencies within your design system, how is that discovered? And also, when it comes to delegating design changes, like who makes the final decision to say, hey, we're going to change the button to this?
Yeah, so every component that is designed in REA goes through 3 stages of discovery. So we call it the 30%, 60%, and the 90%. So every time we do a design discovery, product managers, designers, developers are all involved. So the best thing about design system is not that, yes, we work in the design system team, but doesn't mean we are always right with our answer. So we always involve the design community, mobile community, and product community in making sure the design that we created is what the business vision is. So that being said, through this 3 stages of discovery, we usually come into a conclusion. But at the end of the day, the design system team, based on the feedback and the comments from the community, will make the call, and then we'll upload that in our design system. And again, we usually build things in phases as well. Say we design a button, and when we first release it, we usually release it in sort of a phase 1 release, and we test it with our customers. Our customers are obviously the different design teams or the different product teams in the business, and through that we'll get some feedback. And if it works well, then it's good. Then we keep improving. If it doesn't work well, then obviously there'll be some feedback that they will give back to us, and we'll iterate it together as well. And that helps you sort of manage to create consistency between the systems.
All right, thank you for that. We have another question from Bareful Minder. They ask, I might have missed it because I joined a bit late, but what is the base accessibility level you target with your design system at REA? So I guess they want to know, like, how accessible is your design system?
Yep. So we make sure that we always hit at least double A standard for both uh, the, I guess, color contrast. And when it comes to text, we want to make sure that it all scales properly. And we, for every single components that we basically build, we want to make sure if it's in the web platform, that it follows the WCAG guidelines. And if it's on iOS and Android, it also follows the accessibility documentation that is set up for that platform. So every button for every component, we basically go through it one by one, and we want to make sure when we test it, we run it in our test system. And for example, just like say this button, we tell you the different props that are available for this and what sort of double A standard that you need to follow and why we do so. We also give sort of a guideline on to make sure you achieve those standards. Here is around, for example, use of contrast, use of text as a label, and then things around how do we make sure that things that of interaction, whether it's a highlight, whether it's a key focus, how do people tab, everything is written in here. So double A standard, dynamic font scaling, but for every component that we build, we make sure we rely on WCAG standard.
Yes, thank you for explaining that. And for those that are not really familiar with the double A standards, what is the difference and what do they mean?
So WCAG is a web, basically it's a unifying body that collects all the different ways of creating accessibility standards. So there are basically two different levels of standards. So you've got your double A and triple A. So triple A is your highest level of accessibility. And to hit triple A, basically you got to consider every single interaction, every single size, every single contrast has got to be at the highest level, which actually really makes it super difficult because you are now just trying to cover as many bases as possible. But by the organization standard, as long as you meet double A, so this is a base that is already set by WCAG or WCAG, then you can pretty much run your business and hopefully serve to as many customers as possible. If you want to sort of read a little bit more on the differences between the double A and triple A, I would recommend reading the documents directly in WCAG website, but be mindful that website could be overwhelming. So maybe just Googling the difference can help. Sometimes when you're designing it in, say, in Figma, let me go to my Figma website here. You can also help by sort of checking the contrast, for example. Give me 1 second, my plugin is not running. So if I go say plugins and say I got contrast checker, so let me just bring this up. And if I go plugins, then say I run contrast checker, why does it not work? Oh, it's gonna sound like a frame, sorry. Let me just, it's a bit laggy, my computer. Maybe this one will work. So 1 second. Plugin, contrast checker. And this is, for example, just to show you what things are. I don't know what's happening here.
Yeah, that plugin
sorry.
I've used before. It's a bit weird, but I think if you select the layer specifically that you want to check, you'd have to select it.
Of course. I think that there is a stock. It's probably a better one. So.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. No wonder. This is my. Sorry, I'm sharing the wrong screen. That's why. Sorry. So let me just stop my sharing for 1 second, and I'll share my actual Figma Figma component. Share screen. This one, yeah. This is cool. I'll go back to it again. So cool. Yeah. So for example, if you're looking at this button, and you go plugins. Say you use dark is probably a better one. And when it runs, say you go contrast. I don't know why it's not working at the moment.
Or maybe choose a black and white one. See what happens.
Yeah, I don't know why. Sometimes with live demo, it can be a bit tricky, but normally it should work. Sorry, I'll just try this one more time, but if it doesn't work, so I might stop it there. Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Yeah, so for example, you have the button and you run this plugin, and here it tells you in order to achieve a double A that it needs to be in a certain number of contrast ratio. So because this button is now hitting 4.8, so that hits the ratio for both large text, normal text, and the AAA for the largest text, but it doesn't hit the AAA on the normal text. But that's okay because our business have agreed that we're just lining up on the double A standard. So this is just one of the plugins for you to help to check. There's a lot of other websites as well that you can use to sort of check to make sure that your color contrast is hitting that ratio number. Hopefully that helps. Sorry for that delay in the demonstration.
Yeah, no problem. I haven't checked out Stark yet, but I think I will try that plugin. Anyone else need?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, go
I was
on.
just going to say there are a few plugins that you can use, but yeah, sometimes it's just a bit hard that you got to play around with it.
That's right. Does anyone else have a question for Rifan? Feel free to unmute your mic, or you could use the text chat. We've only got 1 minute left, so if no one has any questions, we could just wrap up a little bit early. Okay, so I see Bareful Minder is typing something. Nope, they said thanks for the presentation.
Oh, thank you for listening.
Yeah, and I guess that that concludes everything. Do you think you could share maybe your LinkedIn or any social media so that our members can follow you?
Yeah, I can certainly do that. Let me just quickly bring that in the chat.
Seems like someone is
into this chat group.
Not on mute. There we go.
Or you can always try to find my name, Rifan Thamrin. I should be there.
Great. Thanks for that. And yeah, I guess that concludes our talk. So I hope you guys learned a lot. Please definitely check out our coffee page if you haven't. If you don't know what that is, I'll just copy and paste the link so that you could find it. If you get value from our webinar talks, definitely consider donating to the Collective Studio. It really helps us to keep this community for free and to have these types of webinars so that you guys can learn as much as possible. I'm just going to grab the link, or if Lewis, if you have the link ready, you could definitely shoot it in the chat. Yeah, you're welcome, Franchet. You're welcome, everyone. And yes, thanks for being here. We really appreciate you guys. And have a good evening. And there's a link for the coffee donation, so definitely check that out. All right. Thank you, Rifan. Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.